All right, let's jump in. Today we're tackling a real heavyweight, one of the most brilliant and, let's be honest, notoriously difficult thinkers out there, Jacques Lacan. We're going to try and unpack his game-changing 1953 essay, the one that's all about speech, language, and what they really mean for psychoanalysis. So yeah, let's get into it.
You know, the funny thing is, Lacan himself gave us the perfect way to think about his own work. He said his writings were like those little compressed Japanese paper flowers. You know the ones? You have to drop them in water to see them unfold. So for today, let's think of this as the water. We're going to see if we can get these incredibly dense, powerful ideas to bloom right in front of us.
So you might be asking, why was Lacan's work so important at that moment? Well, the thing is, by the 1950s, the revolutionary field that Freud had built was, well, it was in real trouble. It was getting stale, losing its edge, and honestly, losing touch with its own core discoveries.
Okay, so this is our first section. Lacan looked around and saw psychoanalysis turning into what he called a disappointing formalism. I mean, it had become this rigid, predictable set of rules. It was all about playing it safe, which totally discouraged any real risk-taking or genuine research. That fire, that desire that started the whole thing, it was being smothered by this, this bureaucratic, almost bean counter mentality.
And the problem was deep, really deep. The so-called unity of the field, it was basically an open secret that it was a total fiction. Everybody knew it, but nobody wanted to say it out loud. In fact, one analyst, a guy named Robert Walder, he put it perfectly. He said if analysts actually sat down and compared their core beliefs, the whole thing would just dissolve into a confusion of babble. They weren't even speaking the same language anymore.
So what was Lacan's big solution? Well, it sounds simple, but it was absolutely radical. He called for a return to Freud. Now, this wasn't about being nostalgic, not at all. It was about yanking the entire project back to the one thing he felt everyone had forgotten: the absolute central importance of language, what he calls the symbolic order.
And this slide is so important for understanding Lacan. He makes this crucial distinction. On one side, you've got the imaginary. Think of this as the world of images, of reflections. It's that pre-verbal sense of me you get from looking in a mirror. It's all about what looks like what. But then, on the other side, you have the symbolic. This is the big one. It's the entire universe of language, law, and social rules that existed long before you were born. This is the world of the speaking I. And it's not governed by resemblance, it's governed by structure and difference.
And this is maybe the most mind-bending part of Lacan's whole project. For him, language doesn't just describe reality, no way. It actually creates it. Think about it. Before language, the world is just this messy, confusing, undefined blob. It's the world of words that comes in and carves everything up, gives things names, gives them a place. It's what turns the chaos of things into a structured reality.
So this timeline really shows the intellectual whiplash here. Before Lacan, the field was kind of obsessed with the pre-verbal kid, with the imaginary, and it was getting dangerously close to just being about biology. Then, bam, Lacan intervenes in '53. His return to Freud puts the symbolic front and center. Language isn't just a tool you use, it's the very field where the unconscious lives. And the consequence of that? It changes everything. Analysis is no longer about decoding someone's weird behavior, it's about deciphering their speech.
All right, so this brings us to a huge, fundamental question. If language is the stage where everything important happens, what does that do to our comfy idea of the self? If this world of words was here before we were, then who, or maybe what, is actually doing the talking when we speak?
And that is the question Lacan just forces you to confront. He completely throws out that simple, common-sense idea that the subject is just, the individual, that unified little person inside your head experiencing the world. Nope. For Lacan, it's so much stranger and more complicated than that.
So for Lacan, the subject is fundamentally split. It's divided. On one hand, you've got the ego, what he calls the me or moi. That's the image you've constructed, right? The coherent, put-together person you present to the world. But then there's the subject of the unconscious, the I or je. And this I only pops up in the cracks, in the gaps. You ever have a slip of the tongue? You say something you totally didn't mean to say, but a part of you knows it's kind of true? Yeah. That's the je poking through the ego's perfect facade.
And this split, this division, is also the absolute key to understanding desire. See, Lacan says our desire isn't just this simple animal drive for an object. It's not about just wanting stuff. It's always relational. Our desire only makes sense, it only gets its meaning when we see it in relation to the desire of the other. And by other, he means that whole big symbolic world of language and culture.
So what is it we really truly want? According to Lacan, it's not the fancy car, it's not the promotion, it's not even the perfect partner. The first, the most fundamental thing we desire is to be recognized by the other. We want a place in that symbolic game. We're desperate for our desire to be acknowledged, to be given meaning by the world of language and law that we live in.
Okay, so let's get practical. How does all this theory change what an analyst actually does in the room? Well, it completely transforms the job. Psychoanalysis stops being about healing a broken mind and becomes something more like deciphering, like code breaking. The analyst has to become a very, very particular kind of listener.
And this is a really profound shift in thinking. A symptom, whether it's anxiety, an obsession, a phobia, whatever, it's not a sign that something's broken in your brain. No, it's a creation of the unconscious. It's a message written in a secret language, and it's just sitting there, waiting to be read.
And Lacan gets incredibly poetic when he describes the different forms this secret writing can take. Just listen to this. Hysteria, it's like hieroglyphs written on the body itself. Phobias are like these little emblems, packing a whole history of fear into one single object. An obsession is a labyrinth of thought you can't escape. It's amazing, right? Every symptom has its own unique grammar, its own poetry.
So the whole process of analysis, then, is about freeing up this imprisoned meaning. The analyst tunes in, listening to the symptom not as a problem, but as a key signifier, a word, an image that's packed with a condensed history. Then the patient is encouraged to just speak freely, to let it all out, which lets these hidden chains of language finally surface. And the analyst's job? Their interpretations help the patient basically rewrite their own story, to give new meaning to those old powerful words, and poof, the symptom starts to lose its grip.
All right, for our last section, we're going to zoom out. We're moving from the analyst's couch to the very foundations of culture itself, because Lacan shows how this whole theory of language has these massive ethical and even mythological implications. It gets pretty wild.
Lacan points to this old legal saying, no one is supposed to be ignorant of the law. And he says, that's not just about traffic tickets. It expresses a fundamental truth about being human. The law he's talking about isn't just a book of statutes. It's the entire symbolic order, the rules of family, of language, all the thou shalt nots that were here long before we were. We're all born into this law, and it shapes us from day one, whether we know it or not.
And to really drive this home, Lacan pulls out this incredible ancient myth from the Upanishads. So the story goes, you have 3 different groups, gods, men, and demons, and they all go to the creator, Prajapati, and they ask him to speak, to give them a message. And what does he do? He answers with just a single syllable, the sound of thunder, da.
First up, the gods. Now, they're naturally wild and unruly, right? So when they hear that da, they hear the word damata, which means restraint or self-control. They interpret the law based on their own nature. They hear exactly the command that they need to hear the most. Okay, next to the men. Their defining trait? Greed. They always want more. So when they hear that same sound, da, they hear the word data, which means to give. For them, the law isn't about restraint. It's a command to be generous, to take part in the great give and take of the world. And finally, you have the demons. They're defined by their cruelty. So what do they hear in da? They hear dayadhvam, have compassion. And this is the amazing part. Even the most destructive forces are still caught in the symbolic web. They hear the law as a call to recognize the other. It's the exact same sound, the same thunderclap, but the meaning it creates is completely different depending on who's listening. And so, this brings us to our final big question. That myth just brilliantly shows how the law of language structures everyone, but each person, each group, hears it in their own way. And that leaves us with a pretty profound thought to chew on. If our reality, if our desires, if even our sense of right and wrong are all built on a language that speaks through us more than we speak it, then how much of what we call ourself is just another message that we are still learning and will probably always be learning how to read?